You ever look at a fighting game and see just the wildest looking anime weirdos? Or just some dude in jeans and a t-shirt and wonder, what's their deal? My name is Crow, and I'm here to dig into the ridiculous lore and storylines of all these iconic and weird characters. But I'm also an artist, and figured why not do a rendition of the character while I explain what their deal is. This is a little show I like to call Who's Your Fighter, where we dive deep into the backstory and lore of iconic fighting game characters, while also giving my own rendition of them. We're starting with the most iconic and recognizable character in fighting games, the classic Shoto Karate Man, Ryu. Ryu's story starts in his childhood. Orphaned with no idea of who his parents are, he's found by a martial arts master named Goken. Goken proceeds to start training Ryu in his martial arts style, and Ryu would dedicate his life to becoming a master. Years later, Goken is visited by his best friend and his son, Ken Masters. Goken then takes in Ken to train alongside Ryu. Ryu and Ken become fast friends and rivals, and eventually see themselves as brothers. At the age of 23, Goken tells Ryu he's done training, and Ryu sets out to wander the world and challenge the strongest fighters he can. Ryu eventually joins the first World Warrior tournament, making his way through all the fighters to face the host of the tournament, Sagat. Sagat is about to beat Ryu until he feels an overwhelming sensation take over, and his desperation to win causes the Satsui no Hado and Ryu to take over. Ryu hits Sagat with the Shoryuken while his guard's down, heavily scarring Sagat and almost killing him. This was the start of Ryu's struggle with the Satsui no Hado and his obsession with fighting. Shortly after this, Ryu continues to wander, until he is told by Ken that their master Goken was killed by a man called Akuma. After finding Akuma on a secluded island called Gokento, they immediately began battling. Over the course of the fight, Akuma would sense a power similar to his in Ryu. He tells Ryu about the Satsui no Hado, a dark power that grows in the practitioners of their martial arts. This power drives a fighter to win even at the cost of one's own life. A power that consumes and destroys. The fight is ended when Akuma destroys the island with a strike of his fist, leaving Ryu empty and lost after the battle. Eventually he returns to Ken and they decide to have a friendly fight like when they were younger. Ryu loses because he was still feeling lost after the encounter with Akuma and his unsavory win against Sagat. Ken, to cheer up his friend, gives Ryu his red headband and reminds him not to lose himself and continue to focus. Ryu takes this to heart, and so his journey continues. Over the course of the next few years, Ryu would encounter a young girl named Sakura, a bit of a fangirl with a desire to train under Ryu. Ryu declines as he feels he's still learning, but he urges her to keep training and find her own way. After that, Ryu has another encounter with Sagat, Sagat demanding a rematch despite not fully recovering from their previous fight. Ryu agrees but holds back, making Sagat the winner. Sagat could tell that Ryu was not going at full power, and promises to fight him again someday when he's at full strength. Years later, as an evil terrorist organization known as Shadowloo, led by the dictator M. Bison, begins to wreak havoc on the world, Ryu is approached by a woman named Rose who tells him of his fate with Bison and how he won't be able to beat him without sacrificing his soul. She was right, as when Ryu eventually confronts Bison, he loses, leaving himself vulnerable to brainwashing, as Bison wants to harness the Satsui no Hado within Ryu to power himself and his psycho power. Ryu is saved by Ken, Sakura, and Sagat, all following him for different reasons. After Sagat has a brief fight with the brainwashed Ryu, he manages to come to his senses and seizes the opportunity to destroy Bison, but only temporarily. After the incident with Bison and Shadowloo, Ryu begins wandering again, and finds himself joining the Street Fighter IV tournament. Over the course of the tournament, Ryu reunites with familiar faces in his long-awaited rematch with Sagat, though we never know who won this time. At the end of the tourney, Ryu faces off against the mysterious Seth and defeats him inside Sin headquarters. As the building begins to fall apart around them as a result of the battle, Ryu taps into the Satsui no Hado in order to destroy a weapon of mass destruction Sin was planning to activate. At the time, Sakura was looking for Ryu and found him attacking the machine. It proceeds to send out a pulse of energy, slamming Sakura against the wall. Ryu moves to defend her and unleashes a Shoryuken on the machine, destroying it. Him and Sakura escape. Ryu is left with a scarred chest and the power of the Satsui no Hado slowly consuming him. until Goken, who had survived his battle with Akuma, arrives and uses the power of nothingness to seal the Satsui no Hado in Ryu. Ryu falling unconscious after this, Akuma appears seeking to cultivate the darkness in Ryu, but Goken challenges Akuma once more, this time for the fate of Ryu's soul. The outcome of this fight is never known, but Ryu would continue his journey, seeking answers about the darkness in him and the power of nothingness. During the events of Street Fighter V, Bison returns and begins to throw the world into turmoil once more. All the while, Ryu is being hunted down by a primal being known as Nikali, a being who seeks to consume power. Ryu confronts the darkness in him, a literal shadow of himself named Kage that represents all the darkness in Ryu and the Satsui no Hado. Ryu, accepting that he could never truly defeat the darkness, accepts it as a part of who he is and embraces the peace inside. With his newfound resolve, Ryu confronts Nikali and destroys him with a single punch, harnessing the power of nothingness and achieving true inner peace. Ryu takes this to the final fight with Bison, hitting him with a Hadoken infused with the power of nothingness, destroying him seemingly for good. After this ordeal, Ryu and Ken gather at a peaceful place and remember their promise to each other years ago. They proceed to have another fight. This time Ken loses, but he understands how much stronger Ryu really has become. The red headband falling off, Ken assumes Ryu doesn't need it anymore, but Ryu takes it back, knowing his journey to learn and grow is never over. He stays true to this, and continues to wander and challenge all kinds of fighters, from a hulking giant of a man to a would-be pro wrestler with growing potential. Eventually, Ryu encounters a strange old hermit named Oro, who proceeds to fight him and test his skill. Having deemed him worthy, Oro would proceed to help Ryu in his training, though involuntarily. Even now, Ryu, looking more and more like his former master Goken, proceeds to continue training, growing, and learning, always seeking the answer in the heart of battle. Alright, now we get to the mostly unscripted part of this video where I talk about the artistic process of drawing this Ryu drawing. As you can see, the drawing started out very differently from the final product. This is the phase of the drawing where you kind of just experiment a lot and try to figure out what exactly you're trying to do or what you're trying to get across, poses, just interesting dynamics and whatnot. And it always takes a couple of tries before you really nail down exactly what you're looking for. And, you know, sometimes you have good days, sometimes you have bad days when it comes to art. This was one of those rough ones where I was struggling to find a pose or a dynamic, I guess, that fit Ryu as a character. Just, you know, trying to nail a facial expression, a pose, not make him too stiff. You can see that there's a lot of iteration and a lot of struggle in just trying to figure everything out. All of this kind of just mirroring that struggle of learning any kind of specialty or art or, you know, the training process, I suppose. And as you can see, the pose completely changed, and I went with a more close-up shot, one just focusing on Ryu's more intense stare, as a lot of the times you see him in the games, he's a little more melancholy. He can be pretty laid back, but he's always somebody who's struggling with this internal darkness, as you heard in the story previously, and I wanted to kind of capture that in both his face and just the general aura of the drawing itself. And it's a little basic and in some places kind of chaotic, as I didn't go for a cleaner look. I went for something a little more messy and a little more loose to kind of represent, you know, Ryu as a whole, somebody who's constantly flowing in between the light and the dark as a character and always kind of on the brink of chaos, but mastering it and keeping it under his control. At first I was going to go with this motif of these evil eyes behind him, sort of like the evil Ryu representation of him, but I figured it was messing up the overall composition of the drawing, so I went with just focusing on this portrait shot of Ryu instead. I really try to go hard in the coloring process of this and try to do more or less this very colorful, almost classic looking rendition, like trying to mimic a lot of like the classic Capcom artists when it comes to the way that I was going about the colors and whatnot. A little crutch that I have is always going for a little bit of rim lighting on everything, just to sort of make it pop a little bit. And I know it's not always the best, but it's sort of how I get my drawings to look the way that they do. And for this one especially, I wanted to go for a more painterly look, something reminiscent of the things you'll see in like a lot of Japanese artists with gacha game art and stuff like that. And this was me experimenting with the background and trying to like understand a feel for the aura that would be presented here, and me trying to draw like the evil Ryu eyes. I don't even know if it was actually supposed to be evil Ryu or if it was trying to be Akuma, but it felt too muddy. This felt like way too much. Then I tried to do for this lightning thing, sort of to represent the lightning that covers the Hadoken, or the Metsa Hadoken when he shoots it, but again, it just felt like way too much. In a lot of these cases, less is more, right? I went for an overall like more cooler tone when it came to the shading and trying to kind of balance the whole light and dark. And I kept trying to go with this like red, you know, border around Ryu, but then I realized that no, at the end of Ryu's journey, it's about him kind of discovering the light, the power of nothingness, and I chose to emphasize that instead. And so I went with this more blue aura to kind of show off the light in Ryu at the end. At the end of it, it is a messier drawing, but I think overall I'm really happy with it, and down the line I would like to refine and clean up the art more, and I'm always going to be experimenting with styles in these videos as they go forward, but I figured why not be a little loose on the first go around and see how people like it. Anyways, this was Who's Your Fighter. Thank you so much for stopping by, giving it a watch, and listening to me ramble on about Street Fighter character lore. There's going to be more videos like this down the line, not just tackling Street Fighter characters, but tackling fighting game characters from all kinds of franchises. If you're interested in any other kind of artwork or any other content that I do, I usually stream the process of these drawings over on my Twitch channel and on my Twitter and Pixiv. You can see me post the drawings themselves in higher resolution, so you get a good look at the finished product at your own leisure. If you have any suggestions for any future fighting game characters I should talk about down the line, make sure to leave them in the comments below, and I'll give them a look-see, do my research, and see what I can do. Anyways, my name is Crow, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.